Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Play the Tape. I'm your host, Derek J. Fields. Full disclaimer, we are not licensed social workers. We're not clinical counselors. We are not certified drug and alcohol counselors, even though some of them will be on the show. And my guest today is getting her master's in clinical counseling. So we're going to get a brief insight to a student on that part of it, aspiring to be a clinical counselor, aspiring to work with people with mental health and substance use issues, both psych and on the substance use side, which is very interesting. She is my first student. She is a grad student of ECU. And she's, like I said, she's working on a master's. And listen, um, um, uh, we here at Play the Tape, we offer a platform of advocacy, support, and community for people with mental health challenges, substance use, recovery. And recovery isn't just a term exclusively for mental health and substance use. Recovery is inspirational change moving forward. A laugh, a hug, a cry, a good movie, some good food, brushing your teeth, a good shower, things of that nature are recovery. Going to go get some sun on your face, going to the gym, just taking a deep breath in, letting it out. That's recovery. So without further ado, without further prolonging this, I want to introduce my sister, my guest, Loren Strong. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Derek. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, where we are, weather is a little rough, so we might cut in and out, but that's okay. We're going to always push forward because that's what we do here at Play the Tape. Yeah, listen, Lauren, I thank you again for coming up here, agreeing to do this, agreeing to share your strength, your hope in how when you're challenged with life and life gets heavy and adversities come up, how you overcome or the different techniques that you use. But first, before we get into all of that, I want to get into your background, where you're from, where you're originally from. What was your undergrad and what is your graduate school, all those different background information so people can get a chance to know who Lauren is on that level. Floor is yours.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. My name is Loren Strong. I'm currently a student pursuing my master's in clinical counseling. I'm originally from a really tiny town called Rockingham, North Carolina. It's in the southwestern part of North Carolina. It's about a stone's throw away from South Carolina. Very small town. I went and pursued my Bachelor of Arts in Psychology in undergrad. And I went through a moment where I thought I was supposed to be in medical school. My family members were really sure I was supposed to cure cancer or something else of that nature. And that comes from some things that happened in my family that I can discuss a little bit later. So for about a year and a half, I was pursuing a master's in physiology. And I just remember just experiencing a bunch of it just felt wrong. I just felt a disconnect. And so I withdrew and I re-pursued my love for psychology. And now I'm currently pursuing my master's in clinical counseling. By this time next year, I should be three-fourths of the way through. And after
Yeah.
taking my examinations, I should be able to counsel people. Of course, I'll be an associate counselor in the state of North Carolina, so I'll have a supervisor for a little while. But that's a really brief scope of my educational background. I hope to be a counselor soon, and I thought I was going to be a PA. So,
How does psychology and counseling, um, from your perspective, from your point of view, go hand in hand? How do they work off of each other or build off of each other?
absolutely. In my opinion, based on what I learned, the general understanding of how the minds of people work. It's the underlying science. It's the practice of it. And counseling and therapy is merely the application of that science. Um, and there is sometimes some disconnect. Psychology is also a relatively new science. It informs us of how people work, how our minds work. There's many facets to psychology. There's some aspects of psychology that are rooted on the anatomy, the neurology of the brain, and whereas other parts of psychology are more concerned about cognition and thought behavior and things of that nature. But put simply, psychology informs much of counseling because it is the very science of it. And I will say I have learned that in the realm of counseling, there's a wide variety of positions. And as I mentioned, psychology is very, very young. Some proponents, some of the people who, in fact, I remember learning in class about feminist theory, feminist therapy in my textbooks, and many of the proponents who developed that theory are still alive. That's how new the world of psychology is. The people who made it are still among us in many ways, or their children are still working in this field. But I mentioned that to say the world of counseling is so far, so vast rather, that different theories emphasize different parts of the human experience. Some theories emphasize behavior, some emphasize
Mm-hmm.
cognition,
Mm-hmm.
some believe that a person's history and trauma are important, whereas others think that those are irrelevant. So psychology is a really vast field, and counseling is a rapidly changing field, a rapidly changing scape, especially as psychology becomes more advanced. And especially as psychology increases in its lens in terms of whom it treats and who it draws research from. Psychology is historically a very Western field. Many of the theories come from European white older men, so to speak. And so we're also seeing a lot of change in what psychology says and looks like as its field is diversified. So I think I went a bit off the rails, but I felt like
No,
it was worth mentioning that psychology is new. So
no, you didn't. You didn't divert as at all. At all. That is good information. Is for me. I've learned that it is the cognitive and the behavioral. My
hmm
mind can drive my behavior into certain um, coping or learned behavior that could jeopardize my health mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Because I have learned certain coping skills that
hmm
uh, to survive, to get through. Not necessarily positively, but just a survival instinct that I had to learn to just keep my place here. Um, I, for what I know you gave that you started off that you switched from being a PA to psychology to for that was your undergrad into being in graduate school, getting your master's in clinical counseling. How did that transition happen? What was it that made Loren like, you know what? I need to do something else. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't sit well in my spirit. So I need to make a switch.
Yep, and the story of that actually even began with when I was just finishing off my bachelor's. Psychology, since it's very new, it's not really associated with high wages, or it's not necessarily whenever parents think of careers they would like for their children to go into, usually it's doctors, engineers, things of that nature, but psychology often isn't on that list. And although I had a huge passion for psychology, my family members told me, even as I was graduating with my first degree, that they didn't think I'd have a job, or they thought I would be a better doctor. And the reason for that I'll explain a little bit later on. But they
Mm-hmm.
just felt I would be a better doctor. And the truth was, I did have a fascination with the human body, with anatomy, and in particular how policy and insurance and uh, other things contribute to healthcare disparities. That's another thing I have interest in. In fact, when I began my bachelor's, I actually was in the bachelor's program very briefly, not committed, but I was on the trajectory, and then I switched formally to a psychology degree. Um, so I mentioned all of that to say, after being told that I'd make a fine doctor and a lot of pressure, and I had taken a bunch of anatomy classes, so I thought maybe I'll just be a PA in psychiatry. And so I took the classes, and I swiftly found one of the main signs I found that it was wrong was a lot of the things didn't click. I wasn't enjoying my classes. A it was great pressure just trudging through them. But another facet of it was I began to realize there was the underlying science of healthcare, but I was also really interested in what drove disparity and also significantly the mental health care crises that many people face, especially low-income people of color. And I wasn't really seeing that covered in my curriculum. And it was something that affected me personally. I saw that affect my family members. Um, and so so it was a combination of me realizing that it wasn't really clicking. It didn't feel right. It didn't flow right. I
Mm-hmm.
just felt out of place. I wasn't enjoying what I was studying, but also I didn't feel like what I was learning was going to help me accomplish the goals I wanted. And for other reasons, my mental health just wasn't super great at that point. I think partly because I wasn't in a program I enjoyed. And so I withdrew. Um, and I gave it some time, and after a lot of thought, prayer, and research, I thought, I really like psychology. I really want to help the mental healths of people. And that drove me to pursuing again psychology in the form of this clinical program, this master's program in clinical counseling. So I hope that makes some sense.
It does. You realize, especially I heard you talk about that there wasn't being taught a mental health aspect for low income families, especially people of color. So there was a need that needed to be met to
Hmm.
emphasize, hey, mental health is a real thing. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. It happens, and people need to talk about it, and they need to know where they can go to talk about it and how they can get the help that they need. So the transition happened for you into mental health, understanding policy, understanding that you want to learn the mental aspect of things in your learnings, in your studies, in your education right now. Is And I want to ask you, do you think the brain is the central where everything is control, everything, behavior, feelings, thought, emotion, sensory, everything stems for the brain, and if that brain isn't healthy, then everything else will be off a little.
I think so. And that question is actually a really broad question as well. It can get into really existential details because some people ask the question, am I merely the consequence of my neurotransmitters and my synapses and my anatomy? Is my personality merely just due to the anatomy of my brain and chemicals rattling in it, or do I have a soul? It's a really broad question, actually, but I do believe that deficits in the brain, trauma can harm the brain. Trauma can quite literally rewire how our brain works. It can change our synaptic connections. I know in my studies, I've learned that psychology is really, as it shifts its focus to aid a diversified population, we're also starting to change how we view diagnoses, and specifically how we view people's responses to trauma. Maybe instead of reducing someone to a mere diagnosis, although diagnosis can be really helpful,
Mm-hmm.
understanding that this person's response is actually not an abnormal behavior, but a very normal behavior to a very abnormal and severe, a very abnormal or traumatic event that they endured, and that can manifest in how the brain is shaped. But I also mentioned that to say that as we learn more about the human physiology and how that affects mental health and the way we think, we're learning some really interesting things. I think the brain is the center of all of those things, but I think also our bodily health, like our brain's not separate entirely from the rest of our body. I remember learning when I still thought I wanted to be a physician's assistant, I took a class that was called the Sociology of Medicine. I loved it. Wonderful class. And something they pointed out was that new researcher was pointing to, and this might sound really weird, but it was suggesting that the microbiomes of our stomachs and intestines could even they showed correlations between our mental health well-being and the state of our gut, which is very
Mm,
strange and unexpected,
mm,
but it's something they're still digging into. But I think it really highlights that our brain and our body are in many ways one. They're facets of one another, and a disparity in one can hurt the other. Um, in fact, as I'm thinking about it, my husband actually has a chronic health condition that causes him a lot of pain. It's something that's not super predictable. It can make moving around hurt a lot. And it actually And although that pain doesn't lead to negative events outside of him, that pain actually hurts his mental health quite a bit, you know.
Mm.
And I was doing some reading, and research has shown that that pain he feels actually would lead to inflammatory responses that would lead to interesting, weird things in the brain sometimes. So I mention all of that to say I think the brain is the basis of many of these things, and harm to the brain and trauma caused that rewires the brain can be the root of a lot of the things we see. But I think it's helpful also to view a person as being a holistic entity, so to speak, and thinking about
Hmm.
how all parts of their experience, bodily, spiritually, all of those are deeply entangled and affect the mental health of a person. So,
And all those things have to work together as one to
hmm
have a whole body, a whole mind, a whole spirit, a whole emotional response of well-being. Like you said, I agree. If one thing is off, all things could be off, and
hmm
it is important to recognize and check in with yourself, check in with your body. I know I check in. I have to check in all the time. Being a person of mental health, of PTSD and MDD, and being an addict in recovery, someone that's in recovery for the last 2 years, I have to make sure that I check in with all of myself, because I can't have one thing more than the other, or that may cause me a relapse.
hmm
Not just, and a relapse isn't, what I learned isn't just physically, it's mentally as well. I can have a relapse before I even physically show signs or symptoms. So,
yeah.
in your life, Lauren, with all the things that you are studying in your education as you become a clinical counselor, and that field is broad, there's so many ways you could go with that. And I thank you and I commend you for wanting to go in that direction to help people like myself. Um, how important is it for you, with all that you've learned, to keep your humanity, your humbleness, your care? Because a lot of people that go into this field, I've seen it in the VA, I've seen it in treatment facilities. They come in and they lose their care, not the
hmm
care for the, as far as, oh, what treatment plan, recovery plan I'm going to put together today, but the care of, these are people here that life or death, in other terms. Like, so how with everything that you're learning, how is it important to you to keep your humanity?
I think it is massively important, and I think it's even when I was studying medicine. I've also worked in a few healthcare adjacent jobs. Um, it's incredibly vital, especially when you're working on person-facing jobs where you're facilitating the health of a person or helping a person in need. Retaining that empathy and humanity is crucially vital. I think it's, in fact, in my studies I've learned so far, something that they found, the therapeutic relationship, the relationship between the
Mm-hmm.
counselor and the client, one of the highest predictors of success and one of the main drivers of success of the therapeutic relationship was whether or not they built rapport. And so, something that they really emphasized in my classes were not just the techniques to use or what fancy questions to ask, but the main basis, the main meat of being a good counselor they described was being someone who was empathetic, someone who was actively listening, someone who didn't merely just write down notes as they were speaking, but someone who seemed actively engaged and actively concerned about a person's life. And that initiates a process of building a relationship that is founded on mutual trust. It allows the counselor to truly listen to the concerns of an individual. Um, but even in healthcare, I think it's vitally important. And I think the way healthcare and mental health care is set up in our nation don't make a lot of room for that. They don't necessarily encourage that, so to speak. Um, I remember when I thought I wanted to be a PA, I was going to be a PA in psychiatry, so I thought I'd always wind up in mental health care somehow. But I just remember I was watching videos of people who were studying what I was studying, and they were working 24-hour shifts and then sleeping all day and studying for tests. But just exhausted and fed and like given a wealth of information. Um, but I mentioned all of that to say, I feel like I feel like altogether, empathy and humanity are central to the therapeutic relationship. It's central to healthcare as well. But in the hustle and bustle of our world, we
Mm-hmm.
can sort of beat that out of our students or not teach that in our students, not instill it in them. And so we send off counselors and healthcare workers who are exhausted or undertrained or, like you said, lack that bedside manner, lack a true view of a person as they may reduce their client to a mere statistic rather than a person who has a history. Um, and I'll make one last note. I know in my previous jobs, my last job actually was centered in healthcare. It was a startup in my state. Um, the way they measured success was in meeting KPIs. Excuse me. And those KPIs were important. Excuse me, I have the driest throat in the world. But but the problem was we were seeing that those KPIs were starting to measure how quickly we checked off boxes
What is
instead of how
KPI? What
well
is
we
K?
actually.
What's KPIs?
So
Real quick.
I am so sorry.
No, I understand. I get it too
Yeah,
sometimes. Absolutely.
yeah.
um,
I think
why
that.
you
Mhm.
that no? Why you take your drink? What is KPIs? I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Yes.
yes.
No, no, you're okay. At the moment, I don't exactly remember what the abbreviation stood for, but I just remember it was a measurement. Essentially, it was put simply, it was a measurement of the goals we. It was a measure. It was a quantifiable measurement of how we reach goals set by ourselves or by our team, so to speak. So, like one KPI they
Uh,
had for us was how quickly you picked up a phone, for instance, when someone called, or how many tasks you completed in a week, if that makes any sense. Like those
it
are KPIs
it
put simply.
It does. We had in treatment at my last rehab, inpatient
Hmm.
rehab in Virginia. They had a track 9, and it was a weekly assessment that we took as
Hmm.
patients to help the therapists or the counselors see our progress in our treatment. And it was just
Hmm.
maybe a 24 questionnaire of different coping mechanisms or different situations or different things that we would find ourselves in, and how would we respond to that, and our new found awareness or education of, okay, I'm an addict now, I'm in treatment, I know I have to change different people, places, and things. I know I can't surround myself with the same things that I've done. I know I have to change my behavior, I have to change my thinking, I have to go to meetings, I have to do all these things, I have to pray for me. And it was just a weekly routine to let the counselors know, okay, Derek may have a red flag, or Derek is doing well in his treatment recovery plan. So was it kind of similar for
Not exactly. Those
okay.
those tools you're mentioning can be really helpful tools in helping clients measure their success. I guess the KPIs that we were given were actually they were less about the growth of the client, and they were more so measurements of how we met goals set by our managers. And they can actually be really helpful, but when applied inappropriately, they can lead to us focusing less on how well did we help this client and more so of um, let's see, how quickly did you finish their chart, or how many attempts did you make, or I guess, how do I put it? I guess sometimes it can measure the wrong thing and it can be oriented in meeting capitalistic goals versus actually
Gotcha.
gauging the growth of the person. But that's a bit of an aside. I don't think that really truly applies in the world of psychology, but I do remember experiencing that in healthcare, in my healthcare adjacent jobs, that when I worked as a pharmacy technician, they weren't really concerned with how much empathy we showed to the people we saw, but they were concerned with how many medicines we filled, or how
Yeah,
rapidly we did everything. Yeah.
I think that is a very important thing, because I think I've seen it on both sides, as a patient
Hmm.
and as someone who worked as a behavioral health technician and a transporter. Um, it it's hard to keep that. It's a business. That's what they say.
Hmm.
It's a business. They have to keep that bottom line. And I believe at some point that the empathy of the humanity and that rapport can sometimes get lost in, like you said,
Mhm.
how many prescriptions got filled today, or did you did you was the client there on time, and did you set a 30? I know sometimes at the VA they'll give us 30 minutes, and you could tell that they're watching
Mhm.
their clock because they have to get so many people in to see, and the treatment can get diluted, you know, watching a clock, or trying to check your bottom line, because there's people out here that really need someone who cares. For you, has there been, are you diagnosed in any way?
Yes. Yes. Shortly after I lost my mom to breast cancer when I was about 15 years old, and afterwards, I remember I entered a really low slump. There were a lot of other things going on in my family, but I went from loving my classes. I was valedictorian of my high school to being unable to show up. I was a lifelong lover of school. And my aunt took me to the doctor, and I received a diagnosis of depression, specifically major depression, but a moderate form of it. Um, and I went to a few counselors, and one counselor said she actually suspected that I had depression for most of my life, which in retrospect makes sense. It's just that my mother served as a massive buffer. So I've been diagnosed with depression, and I've also been diagnosed with anxiety. So specifically social anxiety. So yeah, those are my diagnoses at this time.
With your diagnoses, how does what you're learning, your educational
Mm.
background of psychology and clinical counseling, how does that help you grow with your own diagnosis? How does that give you more insight about it?
Absolutely. Um, Remind me of a joke I've seen about people who study psychology, that sometimes we study it to better understand ourselves, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong. Um, but I think as I've studied psychology and counseling, it's not only taught me how I want to be an empathetic counselor for others, but it's given me insight to why am I feeling this way. It's helped validate my depression, that when I wake up and I feel literally incapable of getting up, that it's not me merely being lazy or choosing to be defiant, but it's something very real that's going on. It's something that's going on down to my neurology, down to my anatomy. It's not something I chose to do. And so I would say that as I continue to study, it's really helped validate and explain what I'm going through, but also, on the flip side, my diagnosis and my experience with my diagnoses have really inspired me to be empathetic. And I hope to show future clients and other people I encounter, even outside of the office, the empathy and care that I hope to receive myself. It's informed me about um, what kinds of things I would like to hear, and understanding that a client might want that too. And to be reminded of times where when someone wasn't available for me in the way I wanted, how can I prevent that for future clients and patients that I encounter in the future? So, altogether, it's helped me better understand myself and feel affirmed in my diagnoses, know it's not my fault, but also taught me how to be an empathetic and caring counselor for clients to come. So,
I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much, because my wife is a recreational therapist, and she sees it from the psych, she sees it from the substance use side, she sees it where it's like these people come in and they're unprepared, and they feel like their sunny disposition can get them over. Or I saw it myself. I was in treatment, and one lady was a dietitian, and she came in. It was like, "Well, here's the paper. Here's the paper. If you have any questions, let me know." And we're like, "Okay." There's no lesson, but then there was one guy when I was in Texas. His name was Steven. Everybody loved Steven because Stephen, you could feel the passion, you could feel the care, you could feel he took it seriously. And he told us, he was like, this is my job. I go home, I read, I go home, I study, I look at, because he didn't do caseloads, he did group talk therapy. And that's what he did through the whole campus. But he read, he studied, he knew what he was talking about. He's experienced trauma on his side. And everyone wanted to go and take his group because you just felt like he cared. And then everyone in the room that shared, you could relate to. So I'm with you with that. I thank you because you're empathetic. You're able, your experiences, and you're able to relate to people like myself because you have that experience of depression and social anxiety and being uneasy and maybe not wanting to get out of bed or overeating or doing things to comfort yourself in an unhealthy way, but in a way that you, when someone comes to you, they'll be like, man, you know, Loren? Yeah. Yeah, I like her too. Yeah, me too.
And I really, really hope that um, I remember. I'm sorry. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the plethora of theories I've learned about how psychology and counseling should work. And some theories hold that simply having that affirming relationship is sufficient for the counseling relationship. I don't know if it's sufficient. I think conversation and providing techniques to help the person navigate their history is important, but it's so important and you can feel it. And like you mentioned, you can tell when the person giving you care, the person who's speaking with you, whether it's talk therapy or a dietitian or what have you can always tell when a practitioner is genuinely concerned with your well-being, or if they just view you as the next item on the list, the next patient, patient number three, so to speak, and the next person to get through with. I remember when I learned when I was studying healthcare, the average doctor's visit was only 50 minutes, which is
Hmm.
horrible if you have a wealth of healthcare issues, especially mental health care, which is very scarcely mentioned even in the doctor's office. So I agree, and I really hope to be that person that isn't merely just um, a counselor who takes notes, but someone who's available for the person. So that is something I hope for, and I am so glad that you encountered people like Stephen, people who were genuinely careful, people who genuinely cared about your well-being, the well-being of your peers, because that makes all the difference in the trajectory of the life of a client. So
Yeah, I've met a few, Tanya, Melissa, Marissa, Steven. I met a good handful of people that I will remember always because they cared. And it may sometimes, I guess, like you said, the different theories that come up. Um, but I believe that if me and you have a rapport that's built on trust and honesty, I'm gonna come to you as my counselor, even if you may not be my assigned counselor. I may come to you anyway because I can relate to you. I can trust you. I know that you have my best. You have you want the best for me, and I feel that. So I'm gonna come to you, and I'm gonna trust you, and 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 I'm going to, whatever you suggest. Um, I'm going to try it. Why not? This is Loren. I'm going to trust Loren. I mean, I know she's not my therapist or my counselor, but I'm going to trust her because I agree with her. I like her stance. I like how she talks. I like how she speaks, how she's educated on different things. And not only that, she has experience. Do you believe that experience coupled with your book knowledge is going to help you succeed more than not in this type of career path that you've chosen?
yes, and I apologize for muting so much. I just completed my battle with a cold a week or so ago, but it seems like the cough keeps creeping up. So I apologize if I enter another coughing fit. But I think absolutely. I think that I think the experience of having a diagnosis, the experience of having gone through several counselors, um, of having gone through several different medications, I think those things can really inform us on how to be empathetic. And it also teaches us things and what things were unhelpful to us. Something I learned in my class, my pre-practicum specifically, was that it's actually not really helpful if someone tells you their life story and you sit down and you say, "Oh yeah, I understand." The truth is, you probably don't. And with my and I've had instances where counselors would try to reach out to me, but they weren't really sure how to. And I realized that saying things like, I totally understand, could actually feel invalidating in some situations. That you haven't lived in my shoes, you haven't experienced this, or it can actually be really helpful. I don't know what you're going through, but glad you're here with me. And I'm just so glad you showed up today. That takes a lot of strength. Like that can actually be more powerful, so to speak. So I think the experience of having had these diagnoses, of living through several counselors and just living through this experience, I think it can inform me. Of course, it won't inform me of everyone's background because what I experience is not always generalizable to what other people experience. Something several of my courses are highlighting is, in fact, I had a few assignments where um, we had to do research on an ethnic group or a religious group or any other identity group that was different from ourselves, and just research how they experience the world, how society tends to perceive them, what counseling practices do and do not work for them. And I found that some things that worked for this group were not applicable to me. Some things they experienced were things I never experienced, things I didn't even imagine were possible. And I think having that humility as well, and I think that humility also comes in part from living through diagnoses, but also in my education, just adopting the stance of humility as well, that I don't know everything, but this client is the expert in their life, and I want to be available for them. So that was long-winded, but I think that both of them together will be really, really helpful in the future. My experience and my education, and learning that I don't know everything. I don't know every experience. Um, I don't know every trauma that a client has gone through, but I can be present with them and help them process that to the best of my ability. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you don't have to apologize for being long winded. I am actually enjoying this interview very much. I'm
Mhm.
learning so much from you and how you see the world from your, like you said, your experiences, things, and your education that you're learning. Do in your education, do they talk about full disclosure, like as far as um sh- if someone came to you and they and you say, I understand,
Mhm.
or trying to validate or trying to empathize, like I understand where you're coming from. Is disclosure frowned upon, or can you do it?
Yes, it is. Disclosure can actually be really, really powerful as well. Oh, you froze for me a little bit. I apologize if I'm
Am I
interrupting you.
good?
I'll stop
No, you're
apologizing.
good.
You're
No, you
fine
stop
now.
apologizing. You're fine.
Yeah, I'll stop it. I'll stop it. But
Yeah, you're good.
self-disclosure can actually really really powerful. Like I actually experienced this in one of my practice sessions. Um, the person I was practicing with was someone who was also someone who was similar in age, similar in ethnicity, similar in experience. And something that we were taught was that it can actually be helpful if you say something like, um, you know, I've experienced something like that, um, or if you don't mind me mentioning, I've also experienced loss of my mother, and I know it can be really hard, and a lot of people may not understand things like that. That self-disclosure can be really, really powerful and can also bridge that connection. You can let a client know that they aren't alone in their experiences. It's just when something we are to be mindful of is ensuring that whenever we self-disclose things we've gone through, to make sure if it's in the counseling relationship, if it's a friendship or anything else of that nature, it's a little bit more flexible. But and especially depending on what agency you're working on, but in a therapeutic relationship, just making sure that if you disclose what you've gone through, that you always make sure the goal is to help the client arrive to their goals, that the goal is to keep it centered on the client. And you ask yourself, in disclosing this, am I helping the client? Am I affirming the client? Or am I chipping in a word because I want to feel validated, which is something we may
Mm,
not always notice. And making sure that when we do this, we aren't turning the conversation onto us, but we're using it to facilitate the process for the client, so to speak. So it can be really, really powerful, so long as we make sure it's centered on the client. So,
got it. Awesome. Um, we got about 15 minutes, and I want to talk about how things that you face,
mm,
your day to day as a wife, as a a student,
Mm,
as someone who is a certified peer support facilitator for NAMI, which the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which we'll talk about because I really want to know how you found NAMI. Um,
mhm.
Doing all the things, all the exams, all the papers, taking a brief vacation that we talked about a little bit off air, all those things. How do you keep your mental stability sharp, or aware of, how do you keep yourself check in? How do you continuously do that for yourself?
Absolutely, and it's actually something I'm still learning too, but, something I've been learning, you asked that question and 1,000 different answers came to mind, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to piece them together. But one of the things I've really tried to emphasize in my day-to-day life is making sure, firstly, that I take time to process things. Like, if I had a really rough day at work, for instance, and um, at my work, we work with a population that may experience a lot of intellectual disabilities or a lot of poverty. And sometimes I speak with a client who tells me they're on the verge of being evicted or they're in the middle of a crisis. And by the end of the day, I've done what I could do, but I'm still thinking about that. I'm still thinking about, man, I hope she gets what she needs, or my heart goes out to her. Making sure I spend time to process those feelings first, to understand that I'm going through them, but also making time for rest. And sometimes rest looks like playing video games with my husband. Sometimes it means laying down. Sometimes it means watching something really dumb. But it also means that I avoid the things that I know trigger me, avoiding the websites that I know are filled with hate, um, blocking accounts online that are filled with misinformation and hate, things of that nature. But really just making time and space for me to breathe and allowing myself to understand if I can't show up to work or if I need to maybe do my work a little bit later, allowing myself some grace, so to speak. Like, I know I've had at least 2 days in the past where something really bad happened personally, and I had to take a really abrupt sick day. And in the past, I would just go, let me just mow through this. I just put aside my feelings, don't process them. Let me just do work, show up, and then leave. But truth is, it would affect how well I would be able to show up for the clients and patients. Allowing myself to take those sick days, allowing myself to just rant with to my husband or a friend or what have you. Something they really highlighted in my degree program is that counselors, especially counselors in training, should really get counselors themselves. It's really important that we find time to disclose the things we're going through. Sometimes those are things we're going through personally. Sometimes those are things that we've sort of some traumas that we've inherited from our clients or things we're processing as we're processing them with our clients. And so I've also tried a few counselors through my not through my college exactly. It's a telehealth service that my college is associated with. But I've tried leveraging those resources. So altogether, making time for myself, finding grace for myself when I'm not able to show up the way I want to. Sometimes I wake up and I don't have the energy I had the day before, or sometimes I wake up and I'm just my depression's on. It's just stronger than it's been in a while for no reason, clearly. And just giving myself grace and taking the time for rest. And also leveraging counseling if that is accessible to you. It is true that counseling is often inaccessible to people, which is why NAMI was so important to me. But if counseling is accessible to you, leveraging that. And if the counselor you have is someone you feel doesn't really relate to you, it's okay to find another counselor. So, but yeah, those are the things I generally do.
I'm glad you said it's important to, one, reach out. It's important to,
Mhm.
hey, if that one's not working, try someone else. If that one's not working, try someone else. You keep trying until you find the fit that's for you. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes healthcare can't be accessible as it needs to, especially in low income communities and people of color. And it is very hard. So we have to mow through that. I like that word that you use, mow through it. Keep it going and suppress it, and not being able to talk about it, then it can come up or manifest itself in so many unhealthy ways. For you, how is it important to have a support system? Do y'all at your school? Do y'all have a a round table, or a community that y'all can talk to each other about certain things like that, or a group text or a group chat?
I'm really glad you mentioned that. At my program, I'm not currently aware if there is anything quite like that for students. I know they have on campus events, I know they have the counseling center and group talks and things of that nature. And since I'm a grad student and I have a home, I don't live on campus, so I'm not always super immersed in what's going on campus, but I do see they have events that are centered on mental health to provide resources to students. But as for like a group text, I don't know if one exists. I never heard of one was made for my class. In fact, now that I think about it, it might be worthwhile to make one for this class or the next one I have. But that would actually be really, really helpful. Just a place for students to just talk about what they're going through. And I think that's why it's so important to make. I remember we discussed offline like a NAMI group on campus for students, a chapter like
Mm,
that, or group
hmm.
counseling sessions. Those things are really, really important. Um, but I will admit, I have seen online and altogether, um, students are suffering. A lot of students are stressed with the pressure of finals, exams, high expectations, having to juggle jobs and home life responsibilities and things of that nature. And counseling students are no different. So I think it is really important to for schools to invest in those resources. I don't know if my school has those resources, but I think they should be made.
I agree with you. We talked a little bit, like you said, off air about NAMI, and a little bit on air about it. Again, NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It is a nonprofit organization for with
Mhm.
educational programs, support, advocacy for those in the community that have mental health challenges, and it is a great resource. How did you become a? How did you get involved in NAMI, and then how did you become a peer support certified peer support facilitator at one of the connection groups here in Pitt County?
Absolutely. I actually really got interested in NAMI. I always wanted something like NAMI to exist, but I really began searching for a group like NAMI after I left my previous job. I thought I really want to be engaged in something that's centered in mental health. I needed help myself, but I also really wanted to be part of a group that was providing mental health care support, especially to low income minority groups, people who aren't able to ordinarily access mental health care, whether it be due to finances or stigma or any other thing. And so I just remember going online and looking up mental health groups in Greenville, North Carolina. And I saw that NAMI was something in my county. I reached out and I asked, hey, do you guys have any way to be involved? I don't exactly remember what I asked, but I was invited to one of their support meetings. Um, and I remember I saw that there was a peer support group, but then I learned that it wasn't available in the county. And they basically asked, hey, would you be interested in training, receiving a brief training and becoming a co facilitator? We can start this group back up. And I thought, that's really important. I'd like to do that. It feels like it would be a good way to use my time, a good way to really get engaged in the community, a really good way to further, not only further my experience, but also to actively do something while I'm still trying to get my degree. So that's basically how I found NAMI. It really started with me leaving my previous job and just thinking, I really want to be involved in something centered in mental health care. And there was a Google search, and I reached out, and they got back to me really swiftly. So, yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Um, yeah, that's how me and Lauren came to meet. Is we're
Hmm.
both the facilitators of the NAMI Family Connection Group, which meets every second Tuesday of the month at 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Covenant Church in Greenville, North Carolina. Um,
Hmm.
and I asked her to be on the show because we had a really cool conversation that we couldn't really get a lot into when we first met, and I was interested because to hear your story, to understand the trauma, to understand the instability, to understand, oh, this is not right. I need something else. There's needs to be met. My mental health isn't sharp. I need to be somewhere where I can give back, where I can meet needs, where I can help those that can't help themselves, the disenfranchised people that can't help themselves, and to show them that, hey, even though depression and social anxiety and guilt, shame, loss, grief. It doesn't matter. There is still victory. There is still recovery. There is still
Mhm.
people out here who care. And I thank you for that. And to learn about it, to educate yourself on top of your experiences. I take my hat off to you. I really, really, really do. Um, Real quick, give me two things that you're grateful for.
Two things I'm grateful for. I am grateful for my screen went dark for a moment. I am really grateful for that is a very good question. I think that's a question to always start your day with and end your day with. I am really thankful for just I'm so thankful that I was able to spend this day just resting. I was able to spend this day. This is the my husband and I are big nerds. I'm so thankful I was able to spend this day just playing Minecraft and relaxing because there wasn't a time I wasn't able to do that, and there are many people who still aren't able to do that, and that's something I can't take for granted, and I'm just so thankful for that. And I am thankful too that I'm in the program I'm in. I know that's very on the nose for what we talked about, but there was a time when I thought I can't be a counselor. My family has told me that I won't be successful. But I am so happy that I'm on the road to not only further my education and something I'm interested in, but that I'm working towards something that will allow me to make a positive and hopefully tangible impact on the lives of people. And I think that's the most meaningful thing to look for in a career or anything you do. Just being able to help people and make change is so important. So that's what I'm grateful for, to have a day of rest and to be in this program I thought I would never be in. So yeah.
Awesome. So it can happen. Like I like that how you said that. Like
Hmm.
people didn't think that you could, and I
Hmm.
am, and I'm doing it, and I'm going to help as many people as I can. But all I need is one, and that's it. That's it. That's it. All you need is one.
Yep.
That one that can be like, I remember Lauren all day, every day, because of what she did for me, what she told me, her journey, her story, and how she came into that facility or that office and cared enough about me to want me to do better for myself. That's all. That's what it is. That's what it's about. Listen, Lauren,
That's all.
listen. I would love to have you back on again. Um, Especially once you start um, what would be next for a counselor? For so is you get your degree, you graduate. Is there an internship? Do you do residential? Like what's the next step?
Yes. So that is a lot of nuance. I'm glad you asked that question because I'm planning to move not very long after I graduate and get my degree. So I've had to look this up myself as well. But basically, while I am still in my program, I there's at least three iterations, at least in the program I'm in. There's pre-practicum, which is basically where we practice on each other. We're assigned, like we switch roles and we actually counsel each other, and it's filmed and sent to the teacher for feedback. Then there's pre-practicum, and then after that there's internship. An internship is actually when we are working with an agency, we're being supervised. Could be paid, it could be unpaid. But you work with the internship. That's the last thing you do. That's what the final semester will consist of. You just working 40 hours a week with this agency as a counselor in training. Thereafter, there are some examinations you have to undergo. What those examinations are depend a little bit between states. I'm hoping to move to Maryland, so the exam I would need to take there is a little bit different from the exam I would need. There's a national one, but there's also a state level one that's more concerned
Mm-hmm.
with policy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, there's at least two national ones, I think. I know this is really vague. I looked at it and I got a lot of information, but I mentioned all of that to say I will have the internship. It's part of my program, it's at the back end of my program. Some people actually continue working with their agency after they graduate. But I'll get examinations and I will be I don't remember the term exactly, but I will basically be a type of counselor that can work under a supervisor, more or less. And then after a period of time, I can be a former counselor. And if I want, I can become a supervisor, which is someone who can help guide and teach and basically supervise other counselors in training. So I hope that makes sense. There's no
It does.
residency exactly, so.
Right. Got you.
Mhm.
No, I thank you for clearing that up for me because yeah, I would love to have you back on
Mhm.
through your different stages and your different evolutions and your different promotions to see how you've come from just being a student to being an intern to being supervised to being a supervisor and how your growth and your experience has changed over time. So I would love to have you back as a recurring guest because I think that's interesting because information is always changing. And to be in that
It
type of
is.
field,
Yep.
you always have to be up on the new different DSM-5 or the different diagnoses or the different theories or different techniques, not only for your clients and your patients, but for yourself. So I would love to have you back.
Absolutely.
This has been great, very informational, very informed. I'm trying to learn my words too. Sometimes I'm still.
You're
I tell my
okay.
wife all the time. I tell my wife all the time, and I with the TBI and all the substances. Sometimes I don't speak
Yeah,
as well as I used to, but it's okay.
that's okay.
Um, I'm just very glad for the information you brought to the table today. I'm so glad that you came and played your tape the way you needed to play it. And we thank you. And listen, we got to get out of here. It's been a pleasure. Love you so much. I'll see you soon because we do got a NAMI meeting coming up. And
We do.
and just God bless you and may you and your family be blessed and much success to you in everything that you do. I think that you made the right choice of
Absolutely.
following your heart, following your spirit to do what you needed to do. And kudos to you for that. So thank you.
Thank thank you, Derek, and thank you for doing this. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of faith to do this, especially as you're going through recovery yourself. So just thank you for doing this and thank you for having me.
I appreciate that, sis. I really do. You take care, Lauren. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Absolutely. You be safe. Adios.
Listen, that's it. You be like, Derek, every time you say you be surprised or you have a big smile on your face or you hype it up. I have to. I have to because play the tape is every episode you've seen or replayed or let other people listen to get experience, strength, and hope. To understand that recovery is an everyday thing for the rest of our lives. And it's okay not to be okay. Listen, with peace comes understanding. With understanding comes love. And with love comes faith. And with faith comes hope. And with that comes recovery. If no one hasn't told you today they love you, I love you, we love you. We'll jump down in that pit with you because we know the way out. I'm excited. However you've been listening, however you've been watching, thank you. God bless you. Until next time. Peace.